Hey guys, welcome back to Results Junkies podcast. As Paul looks off into the distance, we sit here thinking about the power of AI and what happens when your favorite airport gets hacked. Two things we're going to be talking about today, Mr. Singh. I'm hoping that my home airport of Dulles isn't hacked because it sounds pretty ugly. What Sea-Tac has been going through, we're probably going to start with Klarna, which is somewhere we've been before, with their embracing of emerging technology. How you doing today, man?
I'm good. My self-esteem has been squashed by you in the pre-show.
I love it.
What I've learned about you today is that you value entrepreneurial thinking in the companies you invest in, the people you work with, things like that, except when it comes to matters of camera placement and poor lighting choices and things like that. So I would say that 50% of our delay today with this meeting is my tardiness. I was hungry. And then the other 50% is you giving me a hard time. But I'm great.
I don't know that those are 50-50, but I will admit that I was part of the delay going, hey dude, I'm over here. And yet here we are.
I'm making eye contact though. Don't you feel more engaged with me?
I'm just not going to touch that. Like I just not going to go there. I'm engaged and married to someone else. So
I was doing a call with this setup with somebody earlier this morning, and they kind of gave me they're not podcasters or anything like that, but they gave me a similar hard time. They were like, Paul, it's so obvious now when you're looking away at the screen. And I was like, okay, so do you prefer that you think I'm not looking away, or is it more hurtful to you now that you now know I'm looking away? And anyway, that call ended right away. So I don't know how they feel. But,
so it's been a good day for Paul. Yeah, I like it. I like it. All right. Well, if you need
people
to find
started canceling meetings with me today. I don't know. Maybe that had something to do with it.
It's so weird. I tried, and yet here we are. Resultsjunkies.com is how you find us. Email us, text. You can send us questions, comments, concerns, because there are many. You can find him at Paul Singh on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. And if you could do us a favor, whatever platform you're on, if you're on YouTube, like the video and subscribe. Those things are super helpful for us to spread our reach. And then if you're on one of the audio podcast platforms, same thing. Like the episode. There's a link in the show notes to like us on podcasting platforms, and love it if you'd leave us a 5-star review and rating.
And if you get on YouTube, you can critique my camera placement.
You can. Although, to be honest, you don't even need to be on YouTube. If you're on audio, you can just take my word for it that his camera placement is questionable, we'll say.
Ooh.
And we'll go from there. All right, so let's talk about Klarna. So we talked about Klarna a while back. And, they had begun embracing AI to fill customer-facing roles like customer service to be able to reduce their workforce. They're now back out again with a statement saying that they plan to reduce their existing workforce by 50%, which is interesting just from a number standpoint because they had already trimmed about 1,500 members of their workforce, which would have put them just a bit over 5,000 employees. And they're now predicting to drop all the way to 2,000 with the advent of technology. So over a 50% reduction. For folks that don't know, Klarna is what we refer to as a BNPL or buy now, pay later firm. If you do any shopping online, you've probably run into them at the bottom. You'll see buy now with Klarna or, pay in 4 payments with Klarna. And so that's their niche. They're very good at it. And Paul, you flagged this one for us to discuss. I'm curious if you thought the acceleration of job attrition at a company like Klarna would go as fast as it is.
Okay, to answer that question, yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by it. Not to age myself too much, but one of my earliest internships was at a bank, probably in the early 90s, maybe mid 90s or something like that. And so my earliest recollection was I remember working in the telecom department of Navy Federal Credit Union for a summer.
Mm-hmm.
And the big fancy thing at the time was IVRs. And I don't even know what that stands for, but it's like the fancy term for when you call into something and they say press 1 for this, press 2 for that.
Right.
And, the rollout of that really just destroyed the need for any sort of operators or call routing people. And it really kind of also got rid of the need for such a heavy front line of support for the various departments and stuff like that. So, the thing is on the AI side now, almost 30 years later, it's not surprising how fast it's happening. In fact, the reason I particularly flagged this one was what I thought to be the PR masterclass that is sort of associated with this. So, Klarna this is their, if I'm not mistaken, their second downsizing within probably a 12-month period. And in particular, this particular announcement has some fancy wording in it like, hey, we're not going to lay these people off. It's going to be a natural attrition. We're going to try to move these people to other roles or help them find other jobs or whatever. And you made an interesting point in the pre-show where it's kind of like, hey, this is an investor-backed company.
Yep.
Nobody's going to wait for. So anyway, back to your question. No, I'm not surprised with how fast it's happening. In fact, I'm more surprised that there's not more, coverage of stuff like this, because Klarna is probably not the only one that's thinking this way or moving this way right now.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not the only ones. I think, they just happen to be, I think, one of the most rapid, if not the most rapid. So when we talked about them in the past, they had said at that point that they had their partnership with OpenAI was handling the vast majority of inbound customer requests, and that was doing the work of, if I remember correctly, almost 1,000 employees. And since then, they've shed about, 1,400 positions. So, so it seems like that they're even ahead of the pace that they were discussing earlier in terms of how many employees they thought AI could fill in the gaps on. And I mean, look, I think you and I both believe that AI can really maximize the productivity of skilled employees for sure. But we also, I think, both think it's early yet in figuring out how to do that with a high degree of accuracy. And so what's left out of here for Klarna is, whether or not customers are facing issues, getting matters resolved. The example I think I give you, and I talked a long time ago about Amazon and how some of their tactics for unsubscribing from, say, a subscribe and save item or things like that were criticized by folks outside of the company for being unnecessarily cumbersome. So I do wonder, as Klarna's really zipped through this, if the inability to get a human and fix your problem means that customers might be spending more time trying to solve a problem. They initially talked about how much that had come down, which I think was what was so promising about the direction that they were taking with this.
I don't know if this is the direction you want to go here, but just real quick, napkin math. Is it so how many? It's 1,500 jobs, right?
1,500 jobs were the first batch. Now they're talking about another 1,800.
So let's call it 1,800 people. Is it fair to say that on average, if we just average it out, that those are probably at $50,000 a year, maybe?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it has to, I would imagine it has to be lower, because if you're able to, like, let's just say they were somewhere between 5,000 and 5,500, and you're able to take that down to 2,000. And they said that these AIs were doing the work of, call it almost 1,000 employees who were in customer service tasks. I would imagine those people, were probably not on shore in the first place, or many of them were probably not on shore. So I would imagine that a good chunk of this, call it 2,000 plus, were probably making less than $20 an hour. And I would say probably making less than 15, and could be making less than 10.
So let's maybe kind of take an optimistic view here. So let's call it 1,800 jobs. And I agree with you, by the way. Most of these are probably overseas, or there's some sort of labor arbitrage happening here. Let's just kind of meet in the middle and say it's about $35K annually. I mean, just rounding it around heavily. That's about $63 million in overall expense. And that's real money. That's like big money.
I just don't think it could be that big. I think I'd still probably go lower. The only reason why I say it is the entry level customer service jobs, I would imagine, are pretty low paying. And so to get to a $35,000, here's a good example. So take Athena as an example. I think we talked a little bit about this on the show, but Athena is a company that we're an investor in. They employ people overseas to be executive assistants for CEOs, founders, things like that. And they charge a flat $3,000 a month for, call it effectively 160 hours of work. So 40 hours a week times 4 weeks. And so from a number standpoint, you're talking, that's 20, I just did the math, $1,875 an hour. And that's for a pretty skilled overseas person. Minimum wage in the $10 to $12 an hour range in the US, in a number of states where they would have call centers, because obviously you're not going to hire call center employees in California. You're going to hire them in Arkansas or South Dakota or Missouri, where you could get lower paying jobs. And so let's just say, let's go Arkansas, minimum wage is $11 an hour. So I think you're probably closer to something like 25,000 a pop, which is still, to your point, probably 40 or 50 million in savings. And I do wonder with some of this stuff, if as far as what I've seen, and maybe you've seen different, most retail firms have one BNPL option, right? It's not like they have like five that you
Right.
can choose from.
Yeah.
So if that's the only BNPL option you have, and the BNPL customer, the buy now, pay later customer is generally speaking not going to be upper class, probably not going to be middle class. It's going to be middle to middle lower class folks, lower income folks. They don't really have a choice if they want to buy the thing. If they're using a payment plan, it's usually a good indication that they don't have the money in the bank to buy the thing outright. And so that, they may not have a choice. So poor customer service may just be part of the cost of BNPL going forward.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so here's my half-baked thought on this. See, like, I know you would not agree that I'm normal, but I would think that most people listening to this are normal people like me. Like, we don't have the whole global services thing where,
Oh,
Mr.
this is where you
Pizzarello
say
calls.
you're normal and I'm elite. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I
There you
understand
go.
where we are. Got
Yeah,
it.
you're one of the
Yeah.
elites. So the thing is, though, is that I don't think this happens with global services. Maybe it does. But when I call, United or Delta or whatever, inevitably, when I'm calling the normal 800 line and asking for somebody to help me, I can hear somebody's dog in the background. I can hear enough in the background to know that this is probably a stay-at-home, somebody working from home, probably somewhere in the US. I don't think I've ever personally heard anybody that gave me the impression that I was, farmed out to some other country. I guess where I'm going with this is that, you know, over the last maybe 10, 15 years as internet and telecom infrastructure kind of got broader and broader, I think we saw labor arbitrage opportunities arise, and a lot of companies took advantage of that. They, outsourced to Indiana, or they outsourced to Wyoming, or they outsourced to India.
Sure.
I think when we think about this like AI stuff pushing in and quote unquote taking jobs, I think it's more of a competitor. Like it's going to raise the bar on this labor arbitrage stuff, because now at one point it might have been cheaper to like hire a couple people in some other country 20 time zones away, and because of currency arbitrage as well, pay them less. But when you think about the frontline experience and all that, maybe AI is getting better and better at figuring that out. So anyway, I think the point is that most people, like, I don't think AI is going to replace all customer service, because you and I, as
No.
just
Yeah.
normal people, are still going to need somebody. But I think there's probably a day, by the way, where LLMs get so good that we may not be able to differentiate. But I don't know. I feel like that's 5 years off for now, at least. But the frontline stuff, like, maybe we're going to get away from, like you've probably had the same experience as me. Like, it used to be that you knew that when you were going to call United or whatever, you just knew you're going to have to press 2 and then 1 and then something. And you would just try to do that. And then the game that the IVRs would play is they'd be like, please pay attention because our menu options have changed. And then it was frustrating, but that's how they like tried to fight off that,
Yeah.
right? And then more recently, I would say within that last 5 years, they tried to switch to voice. Like, hey, please tell me in your own words what your question is. And
Right.
it's infuriating because it's like, I can't trust Alexa to do anything more than set a timer. And even then it's half wrong. So now you have like that. And then they tried to go labor arbitrage, like, hey, Paul can talk to somebody named Stacy who happens to have an Indian accent. And you're like, by the way, guys, listeners, don't give me a hard time. I'm Indian too, so I can make fun of this. But the point is,
Oh,
though, is
that's the
that
way it works.
like, it's like, we know this is not Stacy, so come on, but now I can't help but wonder if like the people that really should be worried here, like these, I'm going to get in trouble with these people getting affected at Klarna here, but this is the front line of support, and technology is sort of probably getting much, much better. And what we see as AI is probably some combination of AI and LLM and like some voice output that is probably getting sufficiently better to justify the potential nightmare optics that come with a layoff. So anyway, half-baked thought, totally rambled out, but just imagine as an executive that had to like make this decision, you're in a position where you're potentially going to save tens of millions of dollars, and there's a potential shitstorm of PR backlash that could happen,
Mhm.
but you feel confident enough in the software or in the solution to take the bet. Like, I don't know, that reading the tea leaves on this, I think we're going to see even more of this, and it's really going to be the frontline workers, probably the labor arbitraged frontline,
Mm.
not only across the U.S. but in other countries that are going to get replaced or augmented by AI. And the people that make it through that are going to then get moved into like level 2, level 3, kind of higher leverage tasks and stuff like that. So all that to say, back to your original very pointed question, yeah, I mean, this is kind of the rollout here and the speed at which it's kind of like decimating frontline workers is very similar to what it felt like, in the early days of IVRs rolling out to massive call centers. So isn't that the whole thing about like us getting old and what technology does is like, it's like history, right? It's like, it's just sort of recycles itself over and over and over.
Yeah, I think that leaves me with two thoughts. One in relation to those employees that move further upstream, and then another in terms of your comments about United and Delta. I'll start with the United Delta piece, then we'll move back to employees upstream. But on the United and Delta front, I think the thing there is that, and this is, I may have bias here because, as you know, I spent a bunch of time thinking about the airline industry and travel as a whole.
No.
I know. But I really think that AI is not going to have a significant impact on frontline customer service in airlines for quite some time. And it's not that I don't think it's going to get automated. I just think that this is more of a machine learning battle. And maybe that's, maybe it's nuanced and trying to split the hair. But I don't think, if you think about it, when you think about, let's just say you need to change an airline ticket. Could you imagine trying to go through the change ticket process with a data robot, if you will, an IVR process, a change? Okay, Mr. Singh, which flight would you like to change? And what city would you like? There's just so many permutations. What time of day would you like to travel? Where I think that process would be exhaustively longer using AI on the phone. Whereas I think what the airlines are doing right now, effectively, by the way, is they're using machine learning to say, all right, when customers change tickets, X% of the time they change to following day, same city pair. Great. Okay. Machine learning says when Paul goes to the website and says, I want to change my flight, let's show him tomorrow's flight first, and then we'll show him XYZ. It's also where, I don't know if you've done this. I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine who's a tech nerd. Actually, you remember Foz, who came with us to Groton Tech Stop?
Yeah.
And so we were talking about United. And we were talking about how, have you tried to change a ticket in the United app or on the website when you're within 24 hours, what they call same day change?
Yeah, like it's all messed up. You have to, at least the time I tried it 2 or 3 weeks ago, it forces you through the check-in process again,
Correct.
Which makes no sense if I'm already checked in.
Right. You want to know why?
To aggravate me?
Yes. Well, I mean, that's obvious, but no, they're physically, we literally just had this conversation about they're intentionally, not physically, they're intentionally wanting to push everybody through the same day change mechanism so that everybody funnels through one workflow. And I've hypothesized a couple of things. First off is it may be because whatever pieces of the change ticket function just aren't working well enough and that they're seeing more errors there with the integration of two systems. But as we're having this discussion, I also wonder too, if as a company, you can force more people into one funnel and see where people fall out of it. Okay, yeah. Paul went to change his ticket. He went click, 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 and then he called customer service.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Like the more people you run through this model, the more quickly you can effectively update the model with some level of machine learning to say, all right, well, 90% of people made it through 3 clicks, but we lose 20% more clicks once they get to the page 4. And they can start adjusting page 4 because now they can see where the drop off is. So that's one thing I think. The other thing I would say is just in general, like I think about this in the restaurant industry, for a long time in the restaurant industry, the philosophy was always next man up or next woman up. So when the general manager of the restaurant gets fired or quits, it's like, okay, assistant general manager, you're the new general manager. Doesn't matter whether you're ready or not because somebody has to be GM today. And while we've tried very hard not to use that model in our restaurants today, it is the typical model. So now when you apply this to using Klarna as the example, if the people who were on the front line are replaced with AI and the ones that stick around are now the ones that are promoted to level 2 and level 3 support, they don't magically become better employees.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
They're still crappy. So when you dump out of the process, you're still getting a less than satisfactory customer service experience from that human being,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you're likely to at least. So there's some
I,
weeding out that would have to happen there.
yeah. And by the way, I don't disagree with you on this. I think, this is one of the things we're both trying to read the tea leaves on. But I would also say when the stakes are higher, so we've kind of touched on various parts of this topic in previous episodes where, one of the things we've talked about a lot, I think, is this idea that there are certain things where even the possibility of a failure or a false answer or a hallucination, as they call it in AI, can be problematic. So, for example, we were throwing Rob under the bus, so, the attorney Rob here. We were throwing poor Rob under the bus, and we were like, hey, look, if Rob screws up, we can go talk to Rob, which is why we asked Rob for legal advice. But, if the AI has a hallucination and told us to sign the term sheet because it was fine, I can't even get insurance coverage for the AI. So I guess where I'm going with this is my hypothesis on this is that as the stakes get higher, it becomes harder for AI or AI powered automation to get involved. In other words,
Right.
you mentioned earlier, like the example of like the frustration of having to be like talking to a machine. It's like, okay, Mr. Pizzarello, would you like to change? Like, yeah, that is frustrating. I want to hang up. I'm smashing 0 to try to talk to a human, right? But let's assume let's just be techno optimists for 30 seconds. Let's assume for a moment that between AI, LLMs, and all the other technologies tied up, that computer voice interfaces are going to get better. Let's just take that angle here for just a moment, and let's just say that within the next 5 years, that halting computery voice is going to get replaced with something that at least sounds smoother, sounds real. So if that were to happen,
Right.
even if that were to happen, I think the higher the stakes of a hallucination or a bad decision or whatever, the less likely AI is going to be put into it. So let's use Klarna as an example. And I'm not going to be judgy here, but just like by definition, somebody that did a buy now, pay later. The last report I read is that the vast majority of BNPL payments is not the $4,000 trip to Rome. It's the $192 Lululemon order.
Yeah, no, I think that's right because
Right?
because the typical BNPL customer doesn't have the money to go to Rome.
Bingo. So when you start to think about again, I'm, hear me out, audience, before you cancel me on social media. But the reality is, if those customers are calling into Klarna or whatever, and they're frustrated and they're looking for information, pushing them to AI and, forcing them to kind of answer their own questions is less risky because it's not like they can kind of go get BNPL refinanced. That's not a thing right now. That's less risky than potentially putting, AI on the front lines of a global services line at United, because the cost of you defecting to, the equivalent at Delta or whatever is much greater. So I know this isn't articulated very well, but what I would just say is I think consumer companies that have this is first of all going to be limited to consumer companies, I think. Number two, I think the more locked in the customer, the more likely you're going to see AI get pushed onto the first level. So I don't think, I'm tying this back to your original question, I think we're going to see more and more of this AI stuff pushing into the environment where the customer's already locked in and really can't go anywhere else. That's just kind of how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a slower adoption curve for higher dollar spenders. Like, I don't think Amex Centurion holders are going to deal with AI. But I could imagine like a normal Amex user or a Capital One user getting pushed onto an AI frontline service desk. So
Right.
we'll see where that goes. But maybe we'll reference this episode in 6 months and see where it goes.
No, and I think you bring up a good point. I mean, like the dollar value of some of these things is are specific drivers. If Amex is collecting $695 a year from a platinum customer just to hold the card, let alone whatever they make off of interchange.
Exactly. Right.
For sure, that person's going to get more customized support. I mean, even that though has eroded. I don't know if you remember, because I know you've been at Amex for quite some time, but for a while in the business world, Chase, really ate Amex's lunch for a while, and they did that with some of the Chase Sapphire products, and they did it with the Chase Ink cards. And the interesting thing about the Chase Ink cards, which were business credit cards, for quite some time, and I think this was the same for Sapphire Reserve, the customer service minimum standard there was phone picked up within 3 rings. There was not even an IVR. It was picked up. Oh, Mr. Pizzarello, this is, Sally with Chase Ink Line. Thanks so much for your business. How can I help you today? That was what they believed to be the level of customer service. Now, obviously, that's not that way today. And it saves them a lot of money based on what it costs them to have those people in the call center. But,
Right.
almost all of those interactions have gone to some level of IVR before you even get a human nowadays.
Yeah. Well, we can switch. I know we got a time crunch today, but out of curiosity, when you, genuine question here, like when you call as a global, how fast does the phone get answered for you?
Yes, and I know why you're asking that question. I don't think it's the best question to ask. The phone itself is getting answered very quickly. I would say, unless it's a day where there's multiple hubs melting down in United, it's getting answered in less than 30 seconds. And in most cases, it's 2 IVR messages that you're forced to listen to, and then it's picked up within 3 or 4 seconds of that second IVR message. However, what United specifically is doing there is they gave buyouts to a lot of long-term employees during COVID. And a lot of those were folks who have been on the global desk for a long time. They decided not to replace those employees. Instead, if Paul's a really good 1K or platinum phone agent, then you get trained on global services as well and how to handle a global services customer. And when the traffic on the global services line spikes, your number is then put into queue to take calls to thin down that queue. So you would jump from platinum to 1K to global services and vice versa if you were a better call center employee, but you're not a dedicated call center employee. So that's the way they're managing those expenses after thinning out the numbers.
Yeah. Well, maybe a placeholder for some conversation later, and maybe somebody in the audience can kind of like chime in on this. But in a related vein, okay, so I have this theory that as we, when we think about AI and all this jargon everybody uses, most often it's a bunch of like tech people saying, wouldn't it be cool if, and technology like this really doesn't get adopted until somebody finds a use case that almost makes it like magical, right? So for example, MySQL, nobody talks about MySQL, but MySQL's figured itself out. And here's the point. I've been thinking about this idea that, when you think about Disney or Chick-fil-A, pick either one. Let's just use Chick-fil-A for just a moment.
Sure.
Chick-fil-A right now, where I'm at, similar to you, we live close to each other, but probably close to anybody else that has a Chick-fil-A in the audience right now. During high peak times or high volume times in the drive-through, they put an order taker out on the line, in the drive-through.
Yeah.
And I always wonder what that's about, because it's like we're already captive. It's not like you can back out of Chick-fil-A's drive-through once you're locked in, right? So if that's the case, why put the person out there anyway? Okay, you could make the argument that it's more efficient, maybe, because you now know what somebody's going to order before they get to the window. I bet you when they justified that additional expense and the additional insurance costs probably to put somebody out there, it has something to do with the perception of time.
It does. So the quicker you're served, the better. But I would argue too, it's not.
Well, it's not the quicker you're served because I didn't get my burger any faster.
No, the quicker you're acknowledged. Yeah, the quicker you're acknowledged. Yeah.
Right.
So
right.
we call it serving in the restaurants. But yeah, I get your drift. I would say though that it's not an extra labor cost. It's likely an extra insurance cost. But they didn't add an employee. They took the employee that was inside and moved them outside. And so there's extra insurance cost for sure. But what they've done is they've positioned the labor in a place where it's more efficient. So like, for example, we're going to do this with Five Guys where we're going to position the cashier in the dining room beside kiosks in stores that have kiosks for ordering. That way we can help you order off of a kiosk and we can acknowledge you immediately. I'm not going to add an extra person because now I don't need somebody behind the cash register. If you don't want to order off the kiosk, no problem. I'll go back behind the cash register and take your order for you. But I'm not going to have two separate people in that instance. I'm going to encourage you to use more technology.
Let me know when one of the Virginia stores rolls this out. I want to see if my orders are less wrong or more right.
Well, they're already rolled out. I'll tell you offline where you can go to have this test.
All right.
Just make sure you order a milkshake. All right, so let's talk a bit about airports real quick before we go, and I'm going to read to you a line.
Sorry, I have to laugh at that because you want me to finance your Disney addiction by buying milkshakes. Got it.
Correct. Yes. Was there a question?
Capitalism. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Bloodsucking capitalist, no full-time truck driver. That's the way it works. So we're going to put a link to this TechCrunch article in the show notes. By the time this episode goes live, a good amount of the chaos will have dissipated, but I'll just read one line from the article and then summarize what we're doing here. At the airport, the large screens one would ordinarily loiter under to find one's flight were ominously dark. But considering the endless construction at Sea-Tac, I chalked this up to electrical work. It was only at the S gate the extent of the problem became clear. Every screen in the area was dark. So you flagged this, and we'd already been talking about it in some of the other groups I'm involved in. But the airport got hacked, like a number of large corporations have gotten hacked over the past X number of years. And this resulted in the airport effectively having to go from digital to paper overnight, which turned into something of a poop show.
Well, my background is infrastructure and data centers and stuff like that. And I think, I don't know where you want to go with this particular conversation, but what I would just say is that, like, historically, the security posture of most technology companies has been essentially, and I'm probably going to get crucified for this one, but anyway, we'll just see. So I think for the last 20 years, the most advanced security posture thinking, when you balance it with overall costs of running the business, has been this idea of like zero trust environment. And you really try to protect your core data. So this particular case, and I'm going to just like lay this out, as if we're all second graders for the audience. When you think about it, those screens all across Sea-Tac are the display layer of the back-end infrastructure that actually stores the flight routing tables and timing tables and all that stuff. And what's interesting here is that historically, from the infrastructure industry standpoint, a lot, if not all of the security budget and brain power and thinking and whatever goes to securing the core data and where it's stored and how it goes in transit and stuff like that. The display layer probably never gets any love. Nobody ever thinks about, hey, are all the monitors up to date? Did we run all the Windows 95 updates on the, on the little screen above the check-in counter or whatever? Nobody ever thinks about that. It's sort of I think what's going to happen here is that, companies are going to be forced to, and airports, everybody's going to be forced to kind of reassess this. There was like an outage. Wasn't there an outage a couple of weeks ago where, like, as old school as Southwest was, it was like the only airline that stayed afloat.
That was CrowdStrike. Yep.
Yeah, it was the CrowdStrike thing, right?
Yep.
It's like,
they weren't the only one, but they were one of many that had significantly older technology that didn't rely on these sorts of updates at the kernel layer, if you will.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I think it. Okay, so like here's my pessimistic view on this is that, like, as consumers, all of our costs are going to go up over the next, even more than they already are. Our costs for everything are going to go up even further because somebody's got to pay. Like, I don't think business budgets across the most industries include, endpoint security updates on some regular basis. So that's sort of the downside of this. But I mean, Sea-Tac's a pretty big airport. Imagine this happening at like Chicago or Dulles or Atlanta. I mean, that's wild. That's wild.
Seattle's a pretty big airport, but you're right, not to the tune of something like in Atlanta. Still, it definitely crippled the airport and the ability to effectively take care of customers. And I do wonder if it also created a security risk. Well, I mean, I don't even wonder. It created more security risk. It had to. I mean, it's just, the more you rely on these sorts of things, when they go down, the less reliable the human product that replaces it is, because they haven't done it in forever. The article quotes that how, the airlines weren't using the baggage sizers and, weren't asking people to check their bags ahead of time. Well, does that mean that they were checking for lithium ion batteries? Does that mean that if you had a handwritten boarding pass, it wasn't scanned. So maybe, what if there were two handwritten boarding passes for the same person and somebody got in the plane? Yeah. Like, there's just all these things, and it makes you wonder how susceptible we are from a technology standpoint in other airports, something that's near and dear to my heart.
Well, I know we got to wrap, but on this particular topic, I think that, I don't know if we're going to get in trouble for this one, but when we think about, I mean, you and I lived through the mess of 9/11 and all that stuff. For a long time, the word terrorism was associated with big, scary things that explode and guns and fire. Like, that's what you think about, when you think about terrorism.
Yeah.
Here, the point is that, you don't have to go blow something up to cause a lot of panic and to cause a lot of financial distress for a lot of people and emotional distress for a lot of people. And so that's a little terrifying. I mean, not to give people ideas, but it's not hard to get a Wi-Fi jammer or something like that. Just imagine somebody dropping that into their bag, letting it get checked in, and now all of a sudden all the handheld devices in the terminal are probably. I mean, it's just. I'm not trying to give people ideas. I'm just saying, like, if nothing
Yeah,
else,
don't
it
give them
just sort of.
ideas.
I mean, here's the thing. I'm an idiot, and if I'm coming up with ideas like this, smart people have better ones. And I think the reality is that it just makes you wonder. I find that as a parent thinking about traveling now, I have to think about, like, okay, what happens if we get delayed? Like, I used to think, like, okay, what if weather hits or something? I got to worry about that flight, and now it's like, oh man, should we just drive? So one day I'll be at Ed Pizza's level, and I'll just have friends with PJs or something.
There you go. All right, that's a good place to pin it. I'll look forward to your radical improvements in lighting between now and next week.
Oh, I need to talk to you about this. I'll text you later, but go run your meeting. I'm gonna give you three minutes back to run your meeting. Prepare yourself.
You're such a good human. I don't care what they say about you.
I know. All right, man. We'll see. Have a great week, and I hope that Jeremiah finds some great clips in this one, because I feel like I set him up. I'm going to create a little soundboard, or you should create a soundboard with me now. We'll see.
All right, man. Take it easy.
All right, buddy.